Two pieces. Oh,
Sorry about that.
that's okay. Got it. I gotta got it on it. Okay, hi. Hi again. I was just saying that I can tell that Eric and I are two peas in a pod because there's nothing more exciting than going on a swarm call, at least for me. And I also like to take, photographs. And finally, I was able to spell love with with swarms. It took me probably 4 years to get the right shapes, but I love catching swarms. So what's the big deal about swarms, right? Swarms are critical to honeybee reproduction, right? It's a normal thing that happens every year. The first impetus of any colony in the spring, if they come out strong, is to divide. It's not to make honey. It's not to just hang out. It's to actually go through their reproductive cycle and to divide their superorganism in 2 or 3 sometimes, or 4, depending. If we don't get the swarms, they'll likely perish. And the statistics out there, about 18 to 25% only survival rate. Partially because of lack of habitat, partially because people are really scared and still spray them or harass them. I've had people spray them with hoses, with water, and things like that. So it's imperative that we try to collect them before that anything happens to them. Or swarms also may end up in inappropriate location. And Eric is going to do that to remove a colony that's in a wall. And that happens all the time: chimneys, cars, all sorts of, places where they could be a nuisance to people. So beekeepers really want swarms because, first of all, they're free. They can be survivors with good genetic traits. They've at least survived 1 year and gone through a reproductive cycle. And they're caught in your geographic microclimate. And they can also be acclimated to use very specific conditions. Here, I live in Sonoma County, and we have so many different microclimates here. I live in Petaluma. We're semi-coastal. We have fog, we have wind. It's more humid. And right over the Sonoma Mountain Hill is Kenwood and Sonoma and Napa, and they're much drier, much hotter, and actually colder in winter. The bees can acclimate to those conditions. And so when you take bees and keep them in their geographic location that have swarmed, I think they have a leg up, right? And then volunteerism, right? It's a community service to the public. I'm happy to hear that you have a swarm list going on, and 45 people is a lot of people. What we did at Sonoma County Beekeepers is that we divided it by different area on our website, so that people could click on a town or an area. I don't know how Humboldt is divided, but we did it by cities: Petaluma, Santa Rosa, Kenwood, so everybody had a list that beekeepers lived in. And that's sort of how we divvied up. So there's just an idea of something you can think about. Swarm or extraction, right? So when you get a call, you got to determine, because the public usually does not know the difference. They think everything is a swarm. You have to determine when you call them what the difference is, right? Swarms are seasonal, right? They're just left the mother hive. They are finding a new home. They are generally mellow. And we'll talk about hangry swarms. They're very vulnerable, and they often make the public scared and anxious, and they can be really exciting. Extractions, they're year-round, right? They're established hive. They can be big. Bees are more protective and defensive because they have comb, they have babies, they may have some stores in there. And they should only be handled by skilled beekeepers who know what they're doing, right? So, of course, Eric, who does extraction. So he would be one of the persons you would be calling. Or maybe you have other people who have done it before or have really a good reputation to do it. And it often needs specialized equipment. You can see my bee vac here on the left. And it's a very helpful tool to have. And often the public can be annoyed and threaten to spray, especially if it's in their house and bees are coming in the house. We get calls about people having bees that come in through light fixtures or their chimneys or somewhere often in their bathroom, sort of interestingly enough. And often if they are in a building and they see a light, they may follow it and try to get out thinking that it might be an entrance and an exit. And it's a lot of work. It costs money, right? Usually people who do extractions have a contract with the homeowner to do it. I've done some that took the entire day to do. So it's a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of knowledge behind knowing about bees to do that. So the people who do extraction in Sonoma County do ask for money. So typical questions to ask callers when they call is, where is the swarm? Can you describe it? The best description I ever got from somebody, and maybe giggle, but it's sort of true, says it looks like a wet rag. I thought that was really good description, and now with our cell phones, I ask, can you send a picture to make sure that it actually is a swarm, right? And often they can, sometimes they're too scared, but to get close enough. But I've gotten a lot of pictures and I can say, yes, indeed, that is a swarm, or no, this is a bumblebee nest, or it's, a yellow jacket nest. Or the other thing is, you can ask if they don't know how to describe it, is it a mass of bees hanging on each other, or is it coming in and out of a hole, right? And that can determine whether it is a swarm or whether it's going to be an extraction, or whether it's a swarm and maybe a yellow jacket nest, right? And then how big is the swarm? And people can't describe size, so give them something to relate to. So softball size, baseball, basketball, golf ball, give yourself an idea how big it is. And is it in 2 or more sections? Often, not often, but sometimes you go there and there's 2 or 3 swarms in different sections. Sometimes they're close by to each other, sometimes they're separated. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. And then also, how long has it been there? Did you see it fly in, right? Sometimes when a swarm has been there for 3 days and they've gone through the stores that they brought in their bellies, they can be a little bit more testy. We call them hangry swarms. And when I know that, I will take a little spray bottle of sugar water and I will spray the comb in my swarm box with sugar water, and sometimes even very lightly spray the swarm and because they're super hungry, right? And then how high is it? And again, give them something they can relate to, because people say it's, oh, it's 10 feet. And then you go there and it's 30 feet. So give them something, a reference. Is it person height? Is it 1 story? Is it 2 story? And usually you can sort of gauge, if they say, well, I have a 2-story house and it's, it's another story higher, then, the swarm is really high. And then also, how difficult will it be to get to it? Any obstacle, hill, bushes, fences, right? Sometimes they're very accessible and sometimes you're bushwhacking to get there. So, make sure that you're ready, with what you're about to face to catch that swarm. And then also, have you called other beekeepers, right? And did you get their names? Because sometimes a whole bunch of beekeepers show up. Most of the time, people are very nice, and the first person that gets there, is the person who gets to swarm. But, we've gotten a situation where people got a little bit antsy, because everybody got called. And there are times where a caller, they call the police department, they call the swarm list, they put it on next door, and then suddenly you have a whole slew of people come and showing up, right? So just make sure that somebody's actually going there, and make sure that you're courteous if more than one beekeeper arrives there. And then also, is it near a walkway, public area? And can you put some caution tape, so that, or cones, so that people that are walk by sort of take a wide berth? And then also I always ask, are you afraid? And then I try to, if they are, then I try to reassure them that I'll be there very soon. I got their address, I GPS it, and I said, I'll be there in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, however long it takes me to get there. And also usually I also give them like a 5-minute heads up. I'm around the corner and I'll be there, right? And that really seems to de-escalate that anxiety that some people have. I've had people barricade themselves inside a room in their house. That's how afraid they were. So fear is really real for some people around stinging insects. Okay. Oops. Is that the next one? Okay. So really interesting, in 2019, we started taking data from our swarm calls. We asked people to call in their swarms. First, we had one person collecting all the calls until we figured out how to do it on our website, and it's done automatically. But we wanted to know when our swarm curve is. And so the first year, this was the time we did it, and it was very interesting. There was a definite, very big bell curve. And the maybe last 2 weeks of maybe here the last week of March and the first 2 weeks of April, maybe the third week into April is when most of the swarms happen. And so this is when we know we don't want to go on vacation. If we want to catch some swarms, we want to be available and be able to drop everything at a moment's notice, because a swarm will be there from 10 minutes to 3 days, and we don't know how long it's going to be there. And so time is of the essence, right? It is nothing like taking your time to get there and then the bees are gone. And then we did it again in 2020 and 2021, and it's fairly comparable. There we see our little bell curve, right? And so that's just sort of really interesting. And that's something, if somebody's is a data geek, they may want to take this on. But we sort of know when the swarms are happening and how, and this is a time when we're really ready, because we may get 2-3 calls a day sometimes. And look at this one in 2020 with 61 swarms in 1 week. That's crazy, isn't it? Okay, so the swarm departs from its mother hive, and initially bees swarm to a temporary location. And this is something really important to tell people when they give you a call, is that, they're not making a nest right there, typically, right? They are just there temporarily, and they're sending out the scouts to find new real estate. And what they are looking for is a cavity. Bees are cavity dwellers. They do not make a hole, they don't chew up anything. They are looking for an existing cavity, right? So you can start putting the education into the bees when you're talking with people. And then the mass settles, right, covering the queen lands, and the bees totally sort of envelop the queen. And then you can see how this actually does look like a wet rag when you started looking at it. So I thought that was an interesting picture that delineates that, follows that description, right? And they're covering the queen, they're protecting her and keeping her warm, right? Because if they lose her, that's the end of that colony, right? They don't have eggs, they don't have young larvae to make a new queen. So she is the most important to keep safe. And then they send out their scouts, and they send out and they go look for locations, and they come back and they do the dance. And the dance is the same way than recruiting for forage, right? And it's done by the older bees, and others are recruited to check it out, right? So, some bees will check out location A, some location B, some location C, and they come up and they recruit. And the bees that are checking those locations out will check out all different locations. And at some point, they will make a decision. And when a quorum is reached, that's when a certain percentage of the swarm agrees on a location, they will go around and do a stop signal, which is headbutting. It's like a headbutting. They headbutt the bee that is dancing for a different location, say, knock it off, we've decided, stop dancing. And they go to the next one that's dancing for a different location, and they headbutt her and say, knock it off, we decided. And then they warm up their flight muscles, and then they take off to that new location. And that's, we want to catch them before they make that decision, right? So that's why getting to that swarm as soon as possible is important, because they are looking for a new location, and they're dancing and they're recruiting. And as soon as they make that decision, they are going to be gone. I've literally this year arrived at the swarm. I put my swarm box ready to shake the bees in, and suddenly I started seeing tons of activity. And within like 2 seconds, poof, they started into the air. It was absolutely amazing how quickly they broke up the swarm formation and became a huge cloud, and they left. It was really beautiful. I mean, I wasn't even sad that they left, because just the experience of just being there as they just made that decision to leave was just absolutely beautiful. And then the final destination, hopefully it's your hive at home via your swarm box, right? So the swarm, we recommend to bring them home at dusk. We recommend to leave the swarm box there till evening, and then pick them up and then hive them in the morning. The reason we leave the swarm box there is so that all the foragers that are still out looking for a location will be also part of the colony. If you take the swarm midday, what's going to happen is that there's probably going to be a little swarm left behind by evening, the size probably of an orange, or maybe a little bit bigger, of the scout bees that came back, and lo and behold, the swarm's gone and they have no queen. And sometimes you get a second call, or another beekeeper gets the call, and they get there and there's this tiny little swarm without a queen, and because the beekeeper left during the day. I know that's a lot more driving, and that's why having beekeepers in each geographic location makes sense, so that there's less driving going on, and that you can go back easily in the evening and pick it up, right? And the reason I hive my swarm in the morning, I leave them in the swarm box with the plug open, is that they don't have brood that you can chill, and it's cool in the morning, and they stay really calm on the comb or the frame. And it's really sort of easy to bring the whole colony into your equipment. This is not an ideal final destination. Bees have chosen this cavity in a house. It's a difficult swarm retrieval, because the queen probably already entered the corner of this window, had a little crack, and there is between the joist or I don't even know how to pronounce how to say the parts of the inner of the house, but there's a cavity in there around the window the bees found, and it was the right size, and there's a little entrance, and they decided that was an adequate location to start a colony. At this point, I tell the homeowners that we have to wait till they all finish entering, and that it becomes an extraction. I know that some beekeepers try to vacate the swarm with smoke or with bee quick on a feather, and they stick it in the hole and they try to get everybody to go out. Sometimes that works, but sometimes it also pushes bees, if there's another entrance inside the house, into the house. And so that might not be really a good idea. And so at this point, this will become an extraction. Somebody will have to open up the wall and get the bees out, right? So have phone numbers handy of people who like Eric's number, or, or maybe there's other people. of professional extractors and say, this is now an extraction and the bees need to be removed. And here's a person you need to contact. Accession swarm catching equipment. There's my car fully loaded to go swarm catching. That's during swarm season. This is the back of my car. This lives in my car, right? And is your car gassed up? Nothing like going on a swarm call and you're on empty and you need 20 minutes to go to the gas station. Meanwhile, the swarm leaves, right? So here I've taken out some of the essential things that I bring. So I bring a swarm box, and actually more than one swarm box, because sometimes there's 2 swarms or 3 even. My business card I have taped on my swarm boxes so that if I leave my box there, somebody has a question or there's a problem, they can call me. A strap to strap it. I duct tape my swarm boxes because they warp very quickly and bees escape. So at the time I had my SUV and my bees travel in the car with me. So I wanted the lid to be nice and tight, and the corners, sometimes the bees, for some reason, they can get in and out, those little tabs. So I have it all reinforced with duct tape. And the plug, don't forget that plug, that always gets lost all the time. You can buy those extra, you can fashion them. Some people have put a little string and attach them to the swarm box because they do go missing all the time. Some frames, you see, I do foundationless beekeeping, so I don't have foundationless, but I always have one frame, if I have it, of drawn comb in there. Bees, once they go in a swarm box and they have something that smells like home, they get attached, and it's much less likely that they will leave. So it smells so good, right? Protective gear. And I bring a box of extra protective gear. I have some even child suits for kids because I always use this opportunity to teach the public or teach the homeowners, and sometimes a whole family I suit up and they can get closer to the swarm and watch and read and talk and observe. And it's really a lot of fun. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to teach. And then paper and pen in case you have to leave a note to the homeowner if they haven't been there, saying, hey, I was in your front yard, there's a swarm box, here's my number, this is what happened, blah, 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 right? And then a smoker. And not to smoke the bees. People smoke swarms and I don't understand why, because they're communicating with each other during the whole time. And if you disrupt that communication, I don't think it's good, right? They have to coalesce together. If you put them, then throw them in a box, they need to be able to communicate that the queen's in there or the queen isn't in there. They have to get their pheromones, and if they're full of smoke, they cannot communicate properly. Right. So, but the smoker is handy. It's not lit. It's ready to be lit if I by any chance get stung. And then I will start the smoker real quick. And I have a hand torch, so I can do that very quickly to start the smoker. And I will smoke the area where I've been stung, even if it's through clothing, because you got the alarm pheromones. And so more bees might come and smell it and say, ooh, alarm, alarm, and then come and have more stings. So it is there for me and not for the bees, right? And incidentally, I do the same thing when I do hive inspection. I smoke myself, I don't smoke my bees, because then I can really see what the bees are doing. They're not in emergency mode. They're just going on their business. So just a side note about that. A ladder, I bring a ladder. Now it's easier because now I have a truck. It's a little bit more complicated with my little SUV. So I would ask people actually if they have a ladder that I could use. And if I didn't have to bring my ladder, it was great. Clippers, because sometimes there's branches in the way to get to the swarm. A bottle of Bee Quick, which is a repellent, and I'll show you how I use it. And then my little spray bottle with sugar water. I usually would mix it on site because sugar water gets yucky in those bottles if you leave it too long. It starts molding. My favorite bee sting remedy. I don't need any remedy anymore because I don't react to bee stings anymore. So I'm really fortunate right now. I'm sort of immune. I get microdosed all the time and I keep my immunity And the interesting thing is that to keep the immunity, you have to keep getting stung. So I look at it as little medicine all the time, right? And I'm in colonies every day, and I don't get stung every day, but I get stung on a regular basis, right? So have your favorite stinging recipe with you and some water to do sugar water, and also some water for yourself, because sometimes you have to wait there for a little bit. And, it's good to hydrate, especially on those hot days. And then there's that close up of the Fisher Beekeeper that I will show you how I use. And then a bed sheet or a tarp, and a mesh bag, because I used to cover my swarm box in case of leakage in a mesh bag, because it went into a closed car. And then turkey feathers, which I collect in the fall from wild turkeys. That's my absolute favorite bee brush of all times. I do not like those yellow brushes. They are pokey. They hurt. They poke through the bee's wings. They are just not soft enough. And the bees seem not to mind them. And my favorite feather out of all the feathers that they molt in the fall is the strut feather of the male turkeys, because it's stiff on one side and soft on the other. And depending what I need, if I need to brush in a big wad of bees, I may use the stiffer part. If I just need to brush a few bees, I need to use the softer part. Okay, and then, the use of caution tape. Here is my swarm box. I left it closed. That swarm was pretty high, so I left the swarm box attached to the top of my ladder so that the scout bees could find it easily. And this was at near the emergency room. People walking by and driving by, so they were nice enough to give me some cones, and I had some caution tape, and I just put it all the way around. And as you see, there's people who are walking by, curious to see what's going on. So it's good that they stay sort of away. And I put a sign on the ladder that said honeybee rescue, so that they know what's going on. And then, signs. This was at a mall, and they had printed this out with the arrow pointing upwards where the swarm was. They called it a beehive, not a swarm. And then I just, changed it down with the arrow down to where the swarm box was. There was caution tape all the way around. So I just used the sign that they had. But it's nice to have some printed, signs really easily, unless you want to have a Sharpie and some extra paper to do it on site. And then I have this marvelous contraption, and I love this. It's made out of a 5-gallon water bottle, and it has a 1 3/4-inch pipe, about a foot long, a 3 3/4-inch coupler, a metal strap, and then inside is a 3/4-inch cap, because you don't want the bees to fall into the tube, right? And a long extension pole. And this one it gets double its size. And so I can get pretty darn high. And actually, instead of using ladders now, if I can reach the swarm, I use my pole and my bucket. The bottom is cut off, so it's like a big trough, right? And I'll show you how to use it. Right? So easy swarm capture. Time is of the essence, right? You're going there, you want to capture them before they decide and leave. So this is sort of a dream swarm, 5 feet high, it's easily accessible, right? You can gently brush them into the swarm box. You can hold one swarm box in one hand and even take one of the branches and give it a good shake, and they all fall in. The only thing I would change here is I would put a sheet underneath, or a tarp underneath the swarm, because some of them may fall. And then if they fall into leaves and twigs and things like that, it's really hard for them to navigate that, even when you put the swarm box on the ground. And if there is a tarp or a sheet, you can really see them, and you can put the swarm box near where the clumps that have fallen, and then they can crawl in. So, but this is sort of an easy swarm, right? And then a good thing is to keep them off the ground. Sometimes we've had ants attack swarm boxes if you leave them down. Don't know why. So it's easy, then they're off the ground. And even if there's people walking around and they won't trip over a box, especially if it's a little bit in nature and there's maybe a trail or some, walker bys or people who walk by. So off the ground is always a good idea. So this is just a little step ladder. And then these little queenless swarms. So this is, again, beekeepers who have taken the swarm during the day, and you go back and you get the second swarm call. They don't call the same person. They'll call out beekeepers, and I get there, and literally it's the size of a fist, you know, small orange, and there is no queen in there, right? And it can initiate a second swarm call. So that is why I leave my swarm box there till evening and make sure that everybody's home. Here's another easily accessible one. You know, it's just like 3 feet off the ground on a rose bush, just quick shake into the box and poof, it was super easy, right? They all cooperated, they stayed in. It was beautiful, right? Here's that other, that wet rag swarm, right? This one, we just were able to cut the branch and gently set it. This was in somebody's apiary, so we could just put it in her equipment immediately, right? And just be careful when you cut the branch. The bees are very viscous, so make sure you have your equipment or your swarm box underneath of where you're cutting, and maybe even a sheet underneath, because some clumps, as you shake the branch when you're cutting, will fall off. They're hanging onto each other by their tiny little paws, and you know, they can fall off of each other, so in little clumps. So be really careful when you're cutting. You know, make sure somebody holds the branch, and then you do your cut, and then it very quickly, especially if they have equipment that has had bees in it before with the scent of propolis, they will melt. You can just watch them melt into the equipment. It's just so beautiful. And it happens actually pretty quickly. And then they can shake off the remnants of the bees that are on the branch, and then close the lid. And then in the evening, move the hive to the hive stand. You will, if you don't go away too far, get the scout bees possibly come back to this location the next day. But since you're there, you can bring them back if there's a little clump, and then reunite them with the colony if it's happening in your own apiary. And here we go. This is a little bit more complicated just because they're higher, right? So this one is 10 feet high, but it was accessible with a ladder, right? So have somebody hold the ladder when they're going up. This is a mentee, I'm mentoring her. And you can see she was a little too far from it, right? So she, you know, she had to come back down, and we had to move the ladder. But that's all part of learning how to set yourself up to have a successful swarm capture, right? And she had her clippers, and she clipped some branches that were around to have it more accessible. And note the homeowner there without bee gear. And he was so interested, he wanted to get up close. And I said, if you're going to get this close, I have a bee suit for you. And he didn't want to put a bee suit on. So I said, well, then you need to back up away from it. You know, usually swarms are dociles, but every once in a while, it can happen that, you know, the bees are, you know, fall and get angry, or maybe it's a hangry swarm that's been there for a while. And so we don't want to take any chances. So I asked him to sort of, you know, watch at a distance. And then of course, it's important to use the right size ladder, right? Because you're going to often use both of your hands. So you don't want to be on your tippy toes on the top rung and catch the swarm. Right? Like this person here, this is, to me, is too dangerous. Even though there's a spotter there and there's somebody else helping, this to me is sort of too dangerous, right? Because you're using both of your hands, and he's using his knees to hang on to the to the ladder, right? So better is to go 1 or 2 rungs down and have at least your hips against the top of the ladder. You know, and if you can't do that and the swarm is higher, maybe the pole and bucket is a better idea, right? So safety first. At the beginning of my swarm catching, I did some very crazy things, and you know, I was fearless, but you learn quickly. You're around people who've fallen off ladders and broken their collarbones and things like that. It's sort of a rude awakening. didn't happen to me, but to other beekeepers. And so, or shattered their leg and things like that. So not worth the swarm if you're going to get hurt. Bee buddies, super important, because having more than one pair of hands is just priceless. First of all, if you're on a ladder, to have somebody spot you, again, watch the top of the ladder is hip, I wouldn't go any higher than that. And this little group, they're bee buddy friends, and they go on swarm calls together, right? And it's pretty amazing, and they share their swarms. And then what they did is they put a pole, attach it to a swarm box, so that the beekeeper on the ladder has two free hands. They don't have to hold the swarm box in one hand and then deal with the bees with the other. So I thought that was pretty clever idea. So that's what these bee buddies did together, right? So if you don't have bee buddies, try to network. It's really a lot of fun, a lot of education. You learn so much from each other. Hey, you may even go in each other's hives and even learn more. There's nothing like to have a lot of experience, or putting yourself in more experiences than you can even imagine, because you will learn something every time. I learn things about bees. I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm still learning. Things change all the time. New things pop up all the time. It's just amazing. That's why I haven't get bored. I get bored easy. I haven't gotten bored in 15 years. It's a miracle. And wear protective gear, even if it's just to investigate. This is my friend John, who I asked him to come help me with the swarm at my house that was pretty darn high. And he just got out of the car and jumped up and ran up the ladder. Well, we ended up having a pretty hangry swarm, and he got stung. He couldn't come down fast enough, but he could have been really dangerous, because if he had multiple stings and he had a reaction, and he could have fallen, So now I'm just like, I don't even put the ladder up until my mentees are geared up, right? And there can be genetic differences in temperament too. Every once in a while, we have a pretty testy colony. It happens, right? And then the hangry swarm I've talked about, when they've been there 2-3 days and they're running out of stores of food in their tummies, and they're just a little more testy. Or if it's windy and the weather isn't very nice, they hunker down, they festoon tight to keep themselves warm, and they don't want to budge, right? To get a little bit more testy. And then ridiculously high ladder. And this is, don't do it, right? My sister came from Norway, and I was like, do you want to go to bee adventure? And we get there, and these bees are way up in this live oak tree, and I'm determined to get them, because that's in my crazy days. And the homeowner was a widow, and her husband had been an electrician, and she had these ridiculously long ladders. And here we are, both of us up there catching the swarm, which we couldn't get with the pole and the bucket, because they were caked on a really fat branch. They weren't in a nice ball. And so we sort of feathered them in and brushed them in, and we came back down, and we didn't get the queen, and they all went back up, and so did we. So we went up there twice. It's pretty ridiculous. And then coming down with it, we had to just go one rung at a time and pass the box back to each other all the way down. It was crazy. Yeah, don't do it. Just want to let you know that when you get the bug for catching swarms, you may think about doing things that are a little bit dangerous, but try to talk yourself out of it. And then cutting branches, right? To clear a way to a swarm, or remove a branch with a swarm on it. Be ready that some bees may fall on you, and don't panic, right? Or fall on the ground. And also be very respectful of homeowners. If the homeowner is present, please ask permission, right? Do you mind if, and most of the time people are like, yeah, cut whatever you want. We don't care. They're like, you can butcher their tree. They don't care. They just want the bees out of there. So be careful that bees in swarm formation are very viscous, and clumps can fall, including the queen. So if he's like waving that branch back and forth, they could all fall down. So be very slow, very gentle once you come down with a branch that you've cut, right? Because they can very easily fall off. Here we go. Somebody's You know, before you go into your car or take your suit off, make sure that you don't have bees on your hat, right? So some of the bees that we're getting up way high fell on her hat. So we had to brush them off. Right? So check yourself before you open your bee suit. This homeowner declined permission to cut the branch, which would have been so easy with this swarm. And so we had to do a different means. We had to put the swarm box underneath, be on a ladder, shake them in, right? So alternative methods have to be used if you can't just clip the branch and put them in your swarm box. So they were her prize olive trees. So we couldn't cut them. Again, there's the sheet, right? And this is just to show you how you can actually see where the bees are. Rather than if they were on the grass and you start stepping on them because they're, you know, they're the same color as the grass, or, you know, there's tons of leaves and branches and things like that. And so the sheet really gives a better sight of them and an easier way for them to get into the swarm box. This is a very high swarms. Here's the use of that pole and bucket. It's at its full extension and we barely could even reach it. So we ended up putting a piece of drawn comb in there and had them actually crawl in on the comb until it was full. And then we came down and then we did it several times and we ended up being able to get I think we got it. I'm not sure anymore, but this was a very challenging swarm. All right, so it's a way to use drawn comb. Here's my friend John and his wife, and he had to stand on top of his truck to get to the swarm and got it in the bucket. And his wife was there ready to receive it. The reason the pipe is at least a foot long is that when you come down, it stays on the pole. You know, if it's shorter, it will fall right off. And so you need to be able to have it stay on the pole long enough so that the receiver can catch it. You can do it by yourself by coming down very slowly and just sort of walking your hands all the way to the bucket and then slowly take it off and shake the bees in. The middle photo is me. I'm actually on a ladder and full extension pole on this pine tree. And in the past, those colonies, we would just look up and say, oh boy, we can't get them. Good luck, you know. But with this method of being able to, you know, have this extension pole and shake them into this bucket and come down and then pour them into your swarm box, we've been able to get a lot more swarms because they're suddenly accessible to us. And here you can see I'm coming down with the bees inside the bucket, and you have to work fast because they'll get flighty very quickly. Sometimes I tap the pole down a couple of times so they all fall in before I lower the pole down to my helper, if I have a helper, to make sure that they sort of stay disoriented for a couple of seconds, and then we pour the bees into the swarm box. Make sure there's no obstructions in the way. So do a practice run with your pole. You know, see, okay, the pole is over here and I'm going to come down this way. Oh, I can't come down this way. There's trees in the way. I have to come out this way and then figure out how far the swarm box needs to be, right? So that as you come down, you're as close to the swarm box as possible. So you sort of measure, you do a dry run before you actually do it. Right, and here's my friend John again, and I'm so proud of my mentees when they can do it on their own. A sheet on the ground, the swarm box is there. He goes in there, puts the swarm right underneath the bucket, just gives it a big upward shove. They fall in. Darling receives the bucket and throws them in, and you have to do it several times because a lot of bees keep going back up. And then you look and you make sure that you have that classic fanning going on where you see that those bees with their hinds up in the air, they look like they're doing a handstand. They have the tip of their abdomen down. They're exposing their Novicev glands. They're fanning like crazy, saying the queen is in here, the queen is in here. And then you're done, and then you can bring your box home. This was in their own apiary, so they can come back and get the stragglers the next day. They didn't have to leave the swarm box there overnight. And then they hived them that same day into their apiary. Right, here's another instance where we actually sometimes pine trees are really hard to shake the bees off because there's so many little pine needles. And so they really hang on to it. And so we decided to put the swarm in the bucket and then cut it. We had a long pole with a cutter, and then come down with the whole branch and then shake them into the swarm box. So that's a possibility too. Sometimes when you have harder access or you have that redwood, you guys have a lot of redwoods. Those the bees really like to hang on with their might on those little branches. And then we turned around and there was a second swarm behind us. And we're like, oh, where did that come from? We weren't sure if it was a new swarm, a secondary swarm, or if all the bees that went the queen went flighty and a whole bunch of them followed her and they recoalesced in a different place. We weren't sure. So we put them in a separate swarm box just in case. We were so lucky there were two swarms. And then we put them face to face. You can put them next to each other. And if they belong to each other, by evening, they will all be in the same box because they know where the queen is. They can smell. If she's not in that box and she's in the other box, they will move into the other box. And sure enough, by evening, they were all in the other box. It was rainy that day. There was showers. So we temporarily put a little roof on them so that they could do their process on their own. And then the feathers and Bee Quick. So this is the way I use Bee Quick, which is a natural organic sort of repellent. Smells like almonds to me, sort of chemically almonds, you know. So what I do when I'm done with my pole and bucket and the bees keep going back up there, I know I have the queen in the box. I see the behavior. They're staying in there consistently for quite some time. And I still have a little clump up there to keep going up there and I can't. And if I go up there with my pole and my bucket, they just go flighty, right? Those are all the scouts. Those are the older bees that are really attracted to the scent of the queen and they want to go back up there. So I spray a little Bee Quick on my feather, I tape it on the pole, and then I paint the branch where they were on. This keeps them airborne, and then they start smelling the bees that are on the ground in my swarm box, and then eventually they all start coming down. And if you're patient, you can just watch it happen. There's less and less bees up in the air and they're slowly all coming in. They're fanning like crazy and calling everybody in. Here I had to do it on the side of the building. I had to paint because this is where the bees were, right underneath this metal piece in between. And, you know, they kept wanting to go back up there and just so I painted that with my feather. And so we had such success with this method that we ended up doing a fundraiser. We made probably 100 of these. We made it so it could be two sizes because people's poles there were two at the time, two different poles that you could buy, and some were skinnier than others. So you could take the screw out and make the pipe wider or smaller, depending which pole you bought or are buying or have. And we had a quite successful fundraiser, and at least 100 people in Sonoma County have one of these pole and bucket. Some people went on it together and they have one within, you know, for their bee buddy group will have one. Not everybody needs one, or maybe the association wants to have one available, or you can make your own. But boy, that's changed our swarm catching, probably doubled the amount of swarms we reach now. Swarms in the thicket, brambles, and thorns. What do you do with this? How do you get the bees out of there? You know, low to the ground. This one was in blackberry bramble. I mean, it was hard to get there. There was thorns everywhere. And boy, this is when a drawn comb comes so handy. And as you evolve in your swarm catching, you will keep every drawn comb that you ever have that's in good condition, doesn't come from a sick colony, right? You want healthy comb. And it is absolutely amazing. You just stick a drawn comb into the swarm, and they would start just crawling up. And it happens really fast. And then you can take that that frame and put it in your equipment or your swarm box. And at some point, you actually sometimes even see the queen crawling by if you're observant and watch. It's really fun to see. And then, of course, once the queen is there, the rest will follow, or, you can, coax them up. Sometimes bees, like, they don't want to move. They're like, sort of like in a trance. And so I take my feather and I poke them once I have the queen in there and they don't want to move. And I get them activated. Sort of like bees when they jump on another bees. If you've ever seen that in your hive, when a bee jumps on another bee and shakes her, and then she goes on another bee and she jumps on her and she shakes her, she's activating idle bees. And sometimes in a swarm, you have idle bees. They're just waiting for the signal for departing, right? So if you sort of go in there and poke around in there with a feather or your glove or your finger, they start moving around and go, oh, something is supposed to happen. And then they start moving, right? And then they may find your box. And then this is a swarm. It was super, super windy. It was actually a very big swarm, and it just fell onto the ground. And the beekeeper was like, what do I do? What do I do? And I came over, and fortunately she had some drawn comb, and we were able to, I only had one piece of comb. So what I did is I would shake the bees inside the box and then reuse it, because if you can see the middle picture, the swarm was splattered this all the way like this, like huge area, right? If I didn't have drawn comb, what I would have done is I see if I could find the queen. I would be poking around with my finger and see if I could find the queen. And if I could find the queen, I would grab her and throw her in with a bunch of bees, and then everybody would follow. And you can see, sure enough, once I had that queen in there, I got really lucky. It happened pretty fast. I had the queen. They all started just beelining towards the inside the box. It was just so fun to watch. They just knew she was in there. It was just like they could communicate with each other so incredibly fast and well. And then again, this swarm was underneath a rose bush, and I can't believe I even saw it. It was in my own yard. And I was just walking by and I go, what's that? Oh my gosh, it's a swarm. They're so quiet once they're in the swarm, when they're there. And, why did they end up on the ground? I could have had an older queen, or if you see here, this queen had something wrong with her wings. Once I put the drawn comb in there and I saw her on it, she couldn't fly very well, right? So I'm glad that I found them because they would not have been able probably to depart very well and find a location. And then I followed up that colony to make sure that she laid some eggs. Sure enough, she laid some eggs, and they requeened her pretty quickly. And thank goodness she was still able to lay some eggs so they could go through that process. So sometimes when they're on the ground like that, there's some queen issue. She could be hurt, she could be dead, she could be deformed, right? So there could be different things happening with the queen. So, swarms that are on the ground, I'm always going, I want to follow up to make sure I have a queen in there, a good queen, functional queen. This one was caked around a tree, and it was cold and miserable, and I had a really hard time. They just didn't want to budge. So I made a bridge and with a drawn comb. It was in somebody's apiary, so we had their equipment. And it was a very slow process, but eventually they went into the hive. But those cold, rainy, cold days, they're harder to get motivated. The bees, they want to stay together and keep warm. So just be ready that they're just harder to get going. This took most of the afternoon. The use of my magic feather, the turkey, I was using the stiffer part here. They were caked on this fence. And I used the lid of my swarm box, and I just sort of, brushed them in and then added them to the swarm box. There were some more down here. They were in two different places. So love my feathers. Right? Oh, multiple swarms, 2 swarms. Is it a primary, a secondary from 2 different hives? Did the queen do 2 landings and her smell is in 2 different places? What's going on here? So I always have 2 or 3 swarm boxes with me. And what I do, I hive them separate, just in case I have 2 colonies, right? I could be very lucky, and sometimes that happens. So be ready. Be ready with more than 1 box. 3 swarms. Sorry, this is not the best pictures. I wish I had the better picture, but there's a swarm here, a swarm here, and there's a swarm here, right? And so, did they get separated, or are they different swarms? And the beekeeper, as I arrived, decided to combine them. He figured they were all the same swarm, and there was huge fighting that happened. They did not belong together. We lost a whole bunch of bees, right? Lots of dead bees. So 2 of the swarm actually ended up being related, and 1 was not. So don't mix swarms willy-nilly until let the bees decide. Put them in separate boxes, and I'll tell you, they will all end up where the queen is, right? Let the bees decide, right? Again, this is the same picture as before. These 2 merged together. Suddenly they were all in 1 box. Miraculously. When you call every beekeeper, Sonoma County has parking lots from commercial beekeepers, something you may not have up there, but oh my gosh, we have lots all around town with 75 to 100 beehives. And when they swarm like crazy. It's hard to see, but there's 1 swarm here, there's a swarm here, there's a swarm here, there's a swarm here. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 swarm boxes, 5 swarm boxes. There's another swarm here. We actually called the beekeepers, and they said, we don't have time, you just get them, right? And so I think we got 9 swarms out of this. When I get bees from commercial beekeepers, I requeen them because they're not raised to be hygienic and for survival. They are raised to be domesticated, to be fed and medicated. But I do use the bees to start a new colony. And over time, when I requeen them, they will be replaced with the new queen's genetics. So it's a good way to start new colonies for very inexpensive. And if you're raising your own queens, you can augment your apiary by quite a bit, right? So there was bees absolutely everywhere. The whole apiary was swarming. It was extraordinary. And the queen is here signal. This is what you want to be looking for, is this handstand. Literally, they look like they're making a handstand. And the tip of their abdomen is down, right? And here's a close-up. And they see this white little area here is the Novicelv glands, and this is where the pheromone exudes, saying, the queen is here, home is here, come here, come here. They also do it when there's a disturbance. When you open the hive and bees go flighty, bees sometimes on the top of the frames will do that behavior. They will also do this behavior when young bees are doing an orientation flight and it's time to come home. And you'll see that at the entrance. They're calling the young bees home. It's time. You've done your exercise of flight. You have learned to GPS, so you're learning how to GPS, but it's getting late. It's time to come home. So basically, it's a homing device. Here is home, come over here, right? It's not 100% foolproof that you have the queen in there, because I've seen this behavior. And then 30 seconds later, they're all back up in the tree and I didn't get the queen, right? So they reacted really quickly because there was a disturbance and they go, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot of flight B, let's bring everybody home. And then suddenly it's like, oh, wait a minute, the queen's not here, the queen's not here. Oh, let's go all the way back up. And they all went back up, right? So you have to, be patient and make sure it's consistently there for a little bit. And you'll know pretty quickly when, if they don't have the queen, they will figure it out very, very quickly. Alternative hives, if you have a top bar, or some of us are now doing double deep frames. So they're very long frames. They're like sort of like lay-in frames, but they're made with two deeps, with the top of a deep and a bottom of a deep together, making really long. So you need specialized swarm boxes. So here's a beekeeper with a top bar, and she modified her swarm box and made it just shorter so that her top bar fit in there. And then she can transfer her swarm into her top bar very easily. So you can modify your boxes to fit what equipment you have. Urban swarms. Some of you will find some very interesting places the bees decide to go in. And here somebody went out to lunch, and look what happened. And the bees will go to the uppermost part of a cavity and start festooning. Which here was under the hood. Thank goodness it wasn't inside the motor somewhere. So they were able to just pop the hood and then get the bees into the box. Note that how much it looks like the grill of this car looks like the entrance of a hive, right? If they're used to that rectangular looking entrance, oh my goodness, does that look like the entrance to a hive? Absolutely, right? Let's see, not a swarm. So this is a small extraction. If you want to learn how to do extractions, these are really the best because they're teeny. They're in water boxes or meter boxes, and they have very small combs, and they're very, very small, and you can do it in a relatively short time. And you can learn from a beekeeper who's done it how to graft comb onto frames with rubber bands. You know what to look for. You can learn how to use a bee vac, and things like that. So those are really, if you have a mentor, you know, those are just really wonderful for learning how to do it before you go into a colony into a wall or something. This one was full of surprises. It seems like a regular swarm it was on an old barn. And it seemed like they were just caked onto the wall. I'm like, oh, this is really going to be easy, right? But look carefully now, you know, after I looked at the picture, I was like, ooh, what is this? Do you see this center part that's darker? Well, guess what? This was actually an entrance into the wall of the barn. But I didn't know that at big, you know, I was just like arriving all excited. I got my swarm box, I was holding it. I had this sort of pizza thing that I had, and I was very gently scraping the bees in because I didn't have my feather or something. I don't know why I was using that, but it seemed to be a good idea at the time. And then there it is. There was the entrance of a cavity. I was like, oh, pretty sure I didn't have the queen. I was looking at the behavior of the bees, and they weren't doing that little fanning. So thank goodness the barn was coming down, and the homeowner's like, oh, you just rip it open. So I did. I'm like, oh, wow, look how many bees were inside. That was a pretty darn big swarm, right? And I'm like, wow, okay, the queen must be in there. So I, you know, was able to grab these bees. You know, if you are inexperienced, I would leave this to a professional, right? You know, I've been doing this for a long time, so I know bee behavior. I've done wall extractions and things like that. But if you're not sure about what to do, this is when you call Eric, right? And then it wasn't the end. See, so the bees, when I opened the wall at first, were right under here. And I still didn't see that behavior. I'm like, gosh, there's no queen in here. What is going on? To find out that this little piece of wood here had a hole in it, and the bees had gone through it. And since bees started colony at the uppermost part of a cavity, they were going up all the way to the top. And I could follow, I could see them walking. I was watching, they were going up this way into the corner, and they were going up sideways into the corner, and then up on right here. And I was like, oh, wow, that's where the queen is. I still didn't have the queen. right? And then, so suddenly now I'm on a ladder. I had to get a second swarm box because the other one was so darn heavy. And then I ended up, I finally got the queen. She was all the way up there already. And I put the two swarm boxes next to each other, and sure enough, they all joined in. But this is just to show you that something that looks simple can turn into something a little bit more complex. So just be ready for things to be changing, and that you can change along and be creative about how and what to do about it. Unusual places, box of bees. We call those the box of bees. This was in a little apartment building, and the bees were in a box in a box. It was pretty funny, on a pile of box. So we call them the box of bees. And we ended up taking, instead of like doing anything there, because it was a tiny, tiny little balcony, we decided just in the evening just to take the whole box home. And we set it up on the hive where they were going to be. We didn't know what was inside. We didn't look yet. We didn't know how long they were there. We knew that it could be an extraction. And so for a couple of days, we left them orient there so that all the older bees and all the the bees that are with the more developed stingers and guard bees are orienting here. Then we took the whole box around the corner, put a table up, and sure enough, there was a lot of comb in there. And then we did an extraction. And since all the foragers were going back to that location, we only strictly worked with nurse bees. And so they were super calm. It was really easy. And I was able to mentor somebody how to do an extraction and rubber band comb in. And then we reunited them at that location. So we just went around the corner on the other side of the garage and could really work really well, very calmly, take our time and do a really beautiful extraction. Sprayed bees. Every once in a while you go to that call and you arrive to a bunch of dead bees. It's very sad and very upsetting. Fear is number one enemy of bees, right? But try to use the opportunity to educate, right? The homeowner has now a beekeeper's phone number in their contacts. And what I tell people is put Christine Bees in their contacts, because if they can't remember my names, they can remember bees. And so when they go search on their phone, all they have to put in there is bees and my name will come up, right? So this is really, I spend a lot of time with people who make this kind of mistakes and try to educate them about the importance of bees and how there are communities out there ready to help to relocate them and find a new home for them. And they could be there fairly quickly. We can mobilize really fast, right? And this was just an absolutely gorgeous colony, really sad. And then open air hives every once in a while. This happens in inclement weather where the bees just were never able to depart. And after some time, the bees just couldn't, the wax was exuding out of their bodies. They couldn't wait anymore and they started building comb. And once they start building comb, they stick around, and especially if the queen starts laying eggs, they will not leave. That becomes their home, and they can build an open air hive. Unfortunately, they probably won't live through winter, and so this becomes an extraction. And if you look, this was not very straight comb, so this was sort of more of a challenging extraction because we try to put things on straight comb or straight frames, and when the comb isn't straight, it's a little bit more of a challenge, but it's doable. And again, this is when you call somebody who's more experienced, call Eric, whoever is on your list. Make sure everybody has 2 or 3 people that that you can recommend, or call, say, hey, I'm in this situation, I would love to learn, can you help me? And to wait 2 or 3 days to do this is no big deal. They're not going to go anywhere, right? So if you need time to organize and the homeowner is good, then you can organize yourself with other people and do it, right? Really, really large swarms. Oh my goodness, that will never, never, never fit in a swarm box. Fortunately, I just had bought some new equipment and I taped 2 medium boxes together, and then I put the inner cover at the bottom because I didn't have a bottom board. And I actually shook them into a box with, you know, with the frames inside. And then I ran home. Once I knew I had them in there, I ran home. I got a bottom board and then was able to use the inner cover as a lid, and then brought them home in the evening. Leave this to professionals. This is me on top of a roof on this super ridiculously tall chimney, and the homeowners started a fire because they were scared, and so these bees were coming out, spewing out, and I tried to save them. I never did get the queen. The queen never left the comb inside, and it could be super dangerous because wax is super flammable. So I told them to get the fire off right away, because they could start a house fire with the wax in there. I didn't know how long they have been in there. Because the chimney was so tall, I couldn't look in to see with a flashlight to see if there was comb or anything. It was a pretty sad situation. I had to give this colony a frame of brood, and they raised their own queen from there on. But, pass these on to professionals. I mean, it's not, it was super steep roof, and it was, it was a dangerous deal, and I don't do that anymore. Fallen trees is another thing you will get calls about. The one on the left was from the city, and unfortunately they only called us 3 days later. There's the remnants of the bees, there's their comb. We could have saved a lot of this brood if we would have gotten there right away. Here's another colony in that crack. This tree was cut down by a homeowner or a tree company. We now are in contact with tree companies, and they have our numbers. And some of us are willing to take a chunk of tree home. We have trailers that we can attach the trunk to. If they help us put it on it, we can haul the whole bee tree away. And some people leave the bee tree in their apiary as a bee tree, and some people do an extraction at home. It really depends on what they want, but we take the bees home, right? Here, this is the same colony. We try to save some of the comb and to give back to the bees. Of course, all that brood has been exposed for 3 days and was dead. So, but we thought it was to give the bees a little bit of their comb back would be helpful. Redirecting flight paths. So this crew was going to do some jackhammering right at this intersection, and there was this bee colony in this big old trunk, and they were going straight out into where they were going to work. And as you know, vibration is not a bee's friend. They don't hear like us, but they can sense vibration. So that wasn't a good thing. And so what we did, there's my friend John, we put a piece of screen up and redirected the colony's flight path going the other direction, going backwards. And we left a whole bunch of bee suits in case the bees would harass the workers, and they never had to wear them. It worked beautifully. But this is the advice they got when they started calling around before they got hold of us. Oh, do nothing. Cut the tree down, kill the bees. When there might be other options, so be creative, see how can I divert this flight path, even temporarily. Then later we came back when the construction was done, we picked up our bee suits and we took the screen off, and the bees went on their merry way to continue their life, right? Our mission is saving bees. So ask for help or defer. Please don't say anything silly like do nothing, cut the tree down, or kill the bees. Transporting bees, make sure that the entrance to your swarm box faces the same direction as you're driving. If you put it the other way, sometimes the frames swing back and forth. When you put them forward, they are stopped by the end bars. Right, so always put them in that direction and make sure they can't fall over sideways. So I wedge them between things. And as you know, this swarm box has a nice ventilation, right, screen. Very important that they have ventilation. Bees can overheat in a swarm box very easily, and if they get too hot, it can kill a colony. So make sure there's some sort of ventilation when you when you plug that plug at the entrance to transport. Hiving swarm, right? We leave it in the swarm box overnight with the plug open. I usually put it on top of the hive they're going to go into. And I hive them first thing in the morning when it's cool. And it just seems they stay festooned really well, that, they're less flighty, and they don't have any brood to keep, to keep warm. So I'm not chilling any brood, even if it's cool outside. Right? Be very gentle, move very slowly. Again, they're just hanging on to each other by their little paws. And if you're too abrupt, little clumps can fall. So do it very slowly, especially when you're taking them out of the swarm box. Some will actually, because they're attached, they're actually hanging on to each other from one frame to the next. Sometimes I even take 2 or 3 frames at the same time and bring them over as a big clump. But some of them will fall down. So just very, very carefully separate the frames and move up. This is how you learn Zen and slow movement of Tai Chi. Slow down your breathing and commune with nature and the bees, right? Slow and steady. And here, there's my many mentees. We are hiving a swarm. The first frame had barely any bees, but as we got more and more into the frames, you have more and more bees. There's that one frame of drawn comb that we have in there, right? And then feeding swarm. I typically do not feed swarms. The bees come with full bellies ready to build. And I'm not keen on sugar water. I don't think it's good for their biome. I don't think it's good. The pH is wrong in it. And then they're more susceptible to disease. So if I don't have to feed bees, I don't. I actually got my apiary down where I don't need to feed bees right now. I cut my losses early. If they're not performing, don't have enough honey, by summer, I start combining colonies. And so I've come to the point where I don't feed bees at all anymore. Only if I do an extraction late in the summer and the bees need to repair their comb, I might feed. But this is just me and the way I do it. But if you look at that translucence, these are bees in a swarm, right? Look how full of nectar this bee is, or honey. She is full, full, full. And this will help them exude the wax necessary to build comb. And they will build fast because they have to, right? They can't waste any time because they have to build the comb. The queen has to lay eggs, and because they go through a break in the breeding cycle, there'll be some attrition first. They will get smaller first before the first hatchling come out, right? So so it's very important that the queen starts laying as quickly as possible so that they can recoup their losses, because the older bees keep dying every day. And, it takes a while for the first hatchling to come out, right? 21 days for the workers from egg to emergence. And then it's 3 weeks in the hive. And then it's another 3 weeks of foraging, right? So it takes a long time to replace those foragers, to bring in more food. So then they can think about storing for winter, which is their second job after they reestablish themselves. Requeening swarms, I don't immediately. I give the survivor bees a chance. I follow carefully for health and temperament. And I love the diversity of my queens. They all look different. I just love, love, love it. From tiger stripes to very dark to the, black tipped queens. There's another pretty light blondie queens. I tend to like the darker ones. They seem in general to perform better. But I don't know, it's just very anecdotal. I don't have any scientific data on it. But I just look at, I love it. I love it. And I marked, I mark on my notes what they look like. I don't mark my queens because every time you handle queens, you can injure them. I'm not interested in injuring queens. So just, just let them do their thing. And then swarm land in all different kinds of places. This is in the middle of a field a cow field, and there was a rolled up fencing and a fence post, and there they were. I had to tramp through some prickly stuff to get there. You have to love the challenge, loving the excitement, love the variety. And there's no two swarms alike, like I said, I bore easy, but I have not been bored yet. This was actually on a tree equipment, a tree cutting crew called us because they cut down a tree with a bee tree in it, and they ended up landing on their equipment. So we had to go over there and try to get these bees off their equipment. And then this is a swarm trap. These we've been building these. They're very effective, except you can't leave the bees in there very long once the swarm arrives because there's no frames in there and they start building comb. But this one didn't go inside the swarm box. They decided to just hang out on the outside. So we just came with a swarm box and shook them in there. Didn't want to go inside. So there's bees on top of an arbor, a little bit more challenging because you can't really put the box in there. So what do, right? So we put up a ladder, we set the box underneath the arbor, and we sort of scoop the bees in. And then fences, they're on fences here, right? All sorts of different places. Chain link fence. That was not that easy either, right? I had to really coax bees with my feather and get them in there. This was a little bit far away from me. It took me 40 minutes to get there. I came back in the evening and the bees were back on the fence because the queen ended up being in the weeds down below somewhere. So I had to start the whole process again to try to coax these bees in the box. So that can happen. Sometimes it took me a whole weekend to get these bees. So, that can happen. You have to be ready. You have to have the time. You cannot be in a hurry. We get these from time to time. They are on a roof and a little bit hard to get into this, in the rain gutter, right? And so again, this is where drawn comb can come really easy. You just stick it right in there, and then it can crawl up, right? So super precious, super precious, that drawn comb, if you can have it, or reserve some for your swarm, season. And then, in a park, on a tree, they're very common. They'll find that one tree in a lawn or in a park, and they land there. Again, there's my arbor. Oh, and look at this one. These are so camouflaged that someone actually saw them and gave us a call. It's just extraordinary. And it's at the library at the park. And they were just at the end of this broken down wall, just camouflaged, like amazingly camouflaged. And then here inside, sometimes you barely can see them, they're just trying to be quiet, and we're not here, we don't exist, we'll be away, we're going away pretty soon, just let us be, right? And then education, right? Oh, this man here, I swear to God, he probably asked me 500 questions, but you know what? I answered every one of them. And this kid who had to smell the comb, it smelled so good. Oh my goodness, and this family, oh my gosh, I love them. They were just so interested. They were homeschooled kids, and boy, did they have questions, just an interesting question. There's that little boy who was smelling the comb again. He was running around with my bucket on his head and saying, I'm a bee, I'm a bee, I'm a bee. It was just music to my ear. And here, looking at bees on a comb, explaining the different size of the cell, the different color of the comb, what's happening. And there's that little boy communing with the bees. I had 2 swarms there in 2 different boxes. I was waiting to see if they were separate or if they were together. And he just wanted to sit there with the bees and watch them. And so he sat there for probably a good 45 minutes, just communing with the bees. Just melted my heart. Kids is, educate the kids. And then, are you ready and prepared? Do you have enough equipment? Because you will start with 1 colony and end up with 15 when you get successful at beekeeping. And then what do you do with your out of equipment with the extra swarms? Because you just love going to catch them. So then you start giving the swarms away. And so if you network with each other and you know who still needs colonies, at some point you can get to the point where you never have to buy bees again. You can be self-sufficient, and regenerate your own bees through swarms and splitting. And I have not bought bees in 10 years. And I've had successful hives, and always have successful. I never without bees now. And if I were, there's so many people I've given swarms, they would be the first to give me a swarm back. So this is where you create bee communities, where you look at bees as not being my bees and your bees, but bees, they're our bees, they're collectively ours. And we can make it so that everybody who wants bees has bees if we network and help each other and are giving and are receiving, right? And then, of course, you may want to put some extra equipment together. So be ready, right? Swarms, you gotta love them. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing. And
thank you.
We are.
Do you want me to read the questions for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I had a question. Why do some colonies swarm with multiple virgin queens after their primary swarm?
This is sort of interesting. We're noticing it for the last couple of years, a lot more than before. For some reason, we get a lot of multiple swarms. And sometimes even a colony will swarm out. They will send out so many colonies that there's not enough bees to regenerate. And sometimes they're vacating comb. Comb is lipophilic, which means it loves to absorb chemicals. And so sometimes we live in, unfortunately, not a very clean environment. And so sometimes they're vacating, if they swarm out, they're vacating their colony. The other reason is that it's a way for the queen to send out more of her genetics through more of her sort of children, right? When you look at a colony that's about to swarm, you sometimes see queen cells that are mature and then some queen cells that are not mature. And so the queen cell that are mature will emerge first. That first queen will go around and start piping, right? And it sounds like a kazoo. It sounds like chee, 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 right? And the queens that are mature, about to emerge, will answer. And that first emerged queen will go over there, chew the side of the cell and sting her competition. Now, the queen cell that are not finished and not mature, maybe they're not sealed yet, maybe they've just been sealed, they haven't developed to be able to answer. They're still going through pupation. And so you have this queen that will emerge later. And when that first queen thinks she's got rid of all her competition and is going on her mating flight and coming back, this other queen can emerge and take another cohort and have a secondary swarm. And usually it's about a week later, sometimes 2 weeks later, you get that secondary swarm going. Meanwhile, the hive is functioning and the queen is, has gone mated and is laying eggs. So it's really fascinating.
Huh. But why multiple queens? Sometimes you'll get a
swarm
like
because the frenzy.
queens.
Yeah, it's a frenzy because it's not in that first queen that can, that can pipe and go through the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And if they all emerge at the same time, they have to get out of there quick. Right. So I think they all sort of like spew out in a bunch, and you have multiple, and you can hear it in your box. I mean, in my car, when I didn't have my truck and had in my car, I could hear the piping inside my swarm box sometimes, and they were sorting it out while I was transporting the bees. Wow. And if you have multiple queens in one swarm box, they will, either fight, or some of the bees will decide which one is going to be the queen and ball the other queens. They'll sort it out. Wow. Some really astute beekeepers, if they know they have multiple queens, they'll try to make a couple of colonies. Oh. Right? They'll try to find those virgin queens. I have some beekeeper friends that are really good at poking around and finding the queens and making 2-3 colonies. And then making them go on their mating flight because they're virgins, right? And then they come back and then they see, okay, I have 2 out of 3 worked. Well, the third one I'll recombine, right? I'll give it to one of the weaker of the 2, or, you know, they have more chances to make more colonies. So there's different ways people deal with those multiple queens.
That's great. What do you do yourself with your extracted colonies? Do you treat them as a swarm and put in a box?
Yes, so I put them in a regular hive. It's very important to follow up. There's a pretty good failure rate in extractions for some reason. So you really have to follow carefully that the queen, you know, made it. If you find her during the attraction, you can put her safe in a cage. That's great. But sometimes you don't see her and she ends up in the vacuum, and she has to, you know, she has to, you know, she has to make it through that process. And then it's very, very traumatic for the bees. And
I've
so,
noticed that the late fall extractions are definitely big stresses. I mean, I've had only one late fall collection make it through winter.
sometimes we try, what I try to do is talk people into leaving them till spring.
Yeah.
Chances are the colony won't make it, and then the problem is solved, and then you have to just clean out the cavity and make sure you put some insulation or whatever so that bees can't use it again. Usually after summer solstice, they become a lot more difficult. It seems to me that there's a shift in what the bees want to do at that point. They want to go into preparing for winter, and they don't build as much comb anymore. You really have to stimulate them with sugar water and follow up to make sure that queen makes it. Usually it's queen failure that will do your extraction away, I think.
So then to clarify, you catch the swarm with the queen in your swarm box, then you leave it there and go back and get it at dusk.
Yep.
Okay, when they're all settled in, you got them all. And then,
Yep.
I had a hive swarm onto my neighbor's fence, which is 20 yards away from my apiary. I went over there and put the queen and most of the bees in a box and brought them home. There were some bees left on the neighbor's fence. They weren't there the next day. Did they make it back to my bee yard? That's the first question. And how far away can a swarm be and still have the stragglers make it back?
So this, you know, there's that 2-mile rule. You know, they will go back to that same location if they're closer to 2 miles. If they weren't there, if they're really close, they may be able to find their colony. If not, I don't know. There's no research that's marked those bees to see if they went back home in their original hive. I don't think so. I don't think they go back because it's like a biological switch that happens and they're leaving. And so, or either they perished, or I don't know what happens to them. It'd be interesting to take those little bees and mark them and see if they end up in
study.
Yeah, it'd be a great study, but I really don't know what happens to those bees, and I'm really not sure that they return. I mean, I'd like to think they return to their mother colony, but I'm not so sure. I don't know.
So for really tall ladders, orchard ladders are great for stability.
Yeah.
It's more of a comment.
Yes.
I've heard that some people can reach into the swarm and somehow find and grab the queen. Do you ever do this, and would you recommend doing this?
Yeah, they usually see the queen. I don't think you can just go in there and feel
like magically.
Yeah. And people who do that, they do it with their bare hands, so they do have more feelings. But you can see the queen sometimes run around on the swarm. And so if you can, you know, the problem is if you do it with gloves is that you start crushing bees because you can't feel. And so people are super experienced. They do it with their bare hands. It's pretty extraordinary to watch. And I could do it because I'm not allergic anymore. But you know, you always take a chance if you grab a queen that you're going to injure her. So you have to be really careful and really know what you're doing. And you have to do it fast because she's running around.
It's always surprising how warm it is in there.
Yes.
It's amazing how hot it is.
Yeah.
So making a pull bucket from one of those square-sided buckets works great. We had a speaker last year from Blue Green Horizons who calls it a queen throne. Basically the same idea, except you stick it up there and leave it for a little longer, let them kind of move into it.
Yeah, with some comb in it,
Yep,
or
yep.
yeah,
And
that could work. That could work also.
I've done like a little bit of burr comb that has some drone brood.
Mm,
It works really well, brings them in.
interesting. Yeah, the reason I like the water bottles is because I can see through it.
Yeah.
And I can know where the swarm is. I can watch where I'm, sort of hitting up to make them fall into it. But yeah, I like that idea. If you can leave it there, I don't know how to secure the pole there. Could be a challenge if you can't attach it to something. I don't know.
Well, this guy like it gets the bucket, pushes it up into the branch, and then locks the extension. It's in the ground. It's not going anywhere.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah, there's many ways. I mean, beekeepers are clever. And you can learn something from any beekeeper, and tricks and trade, tricks of the trade are plenty out there.
we all have a little MacGyver in us.
Yep.
I had 2 swarms in the past 24 hours. They both went to the same place. Could they be merged? Maybe they are from the same colony.
Yeah, they might be from the same colony, but they probably each have a separately. So you have a secondary swarm. And so I wouldn't merge them until you had to, like if one of them failed, had a queen failure, I would see if you can get 2 colonies out of it first. Or if one gets too weak or too small and you don't think it's going to make it through winter, maybe then you can merge, but I would give it a try to see if you can get 2 colonies out of it.
Where do you get those water bottles? I think they're pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, we got lucky. Some business changed water bottle company, and the old company abandoned their it must have been 100 bottles. So we got lucky in that sense. So we recycled them. And so, but you can actually buy them. They're expensive for what it is, or you buy a bottle with water in it, which is cheaper than buying an empty one. Drink the water and then you have one. And it used to be like $5 or something for that, and it was like $25 to buy an empty one. So you might as well just buy the water.
If bees swarm and you remove the queen, or the queen can't fly, the bees will go back to the hive they came from. True?
Not necessarily. Yeah, I said, so that's the same about the little clump of bees returning or not. I believe that there's biologically they switched. I don't think they go back. But I don't know. I don't have any research. I don't think there's any data. I haven't seen or read anything about that.
And Winco has those 5-gallon jugs if anybody's wants to go get one. So that's it for questions. Yeah, I always have my truck ready. I'm ready for a swarm. So you don't want to be scrambling. You get that call, you want to have everything ready.
Yeah, even if you put everything in a bin and everything together, then to throw in the car if you need to use your car or truck for different things. But yeah, be ready. You don't have time to go, okay, where is this and where is that, because time is of the essence. And I've gotten there sometimes and the swarm is gone.
Yeah, same here.
So if don't gas up, make sure your gas tank is full, and things like that. Just yeah, and if you can't go, make sure you have also a list of people that you can call and help the homeowners, because especially if they're in a panic, if I can't go for some reason, I'm on another swarm call, or I'm mentoring or something, then I'm like, okay, hold on, I will find somebody and I'll call the people on my list until I get somebody who can go, and then I make sure that they connect and that person is taken care of.
Hey, Hank, you got a question?
Yeah, I do, Christine. I'm lucky to have my beehive in my backyard, my colonies in my backyard. And I have a nice sunroof, and I have my trap set right on top of the sunroof. 9 times I have caught 2-3 swarms that way. They go directly into the trap. I got drawn out comb, so they don't even take an immediate step. The scouts have that figured out.
Yes, sometimes some colonies will send out scouts ahead of time. I think Tom Seeley talked about that. that every once in a while you have those colonies that that you know, they're good planners. They plan ahead.
Okay, then a follow-up question. The one time this summer, I had an aftercast swarm. I did a 4 split and I left quite too many queen cells in it. And lo and behold, a week later, they swarmed. They went to the trap box, but they didn't go in. They
Mhm.
all 3 clustered around, found 3 different queens. I found one and manually put it in the box. Lo and behold, she called out. I panicked. I called Eric. What did I do? I took another nuke box and set it right next to it. And they all called in that one. Why didn't they accept it? Was that because in immediate, there were 3
Yeah.
different queens, 3 different clusters around that trap box. And I said, and I put one queen in there. Lo and behold, she calls out and I says, why don't you like this home? So I put another box next to it, probably not more than a 10 a foot away. And they're called into that box.
Huh.
Architects.
Well, they like that one better.
I
don't
thought it was because of the intermediate, you know,
Yeah.
it's like there's all that clump, but that's not where they want to go. They were not
Yeah.
organized enough to go in there.
Yeah, it's possible. And when they're that, you know, that small, when you have small clumps like that, you need to take enough bees with, you can't just take the queen. If you only have one queen, I think it's much
But they were on the
easier.
side of the box. That wasn't
Yeah.
fine. They wanted a box. I said, they even had the opening. I said, just go in. They
Yeah.
didn't want to go in.
Yeah, they're you know, they'll surprise us, and sometimes we don't quite understand their behaviors fully, but we have to trust that they know what they're doing. And for some reason, that second box did the trick.
Did
Yeah, you know, and you were lucky that you were able to do that, you know, that you thought about it and it worked.
And a follow up on that one, out of the 3 queens though, when I took the swarm box away, a week later, there was only 1 queen left in there.
Interesting. Yeah.
They figured it out.
They figured it out. Yep. Yep. Yeah, because they're not going to have 3 queens. You know, every blue moon, you can have 2 queens in a hive, and that's usually in soup procedures. You know, when you go in a hive and you've had a brand new queen and the old queen is still there temporarily laying eggs, and suddenly she disappears. And those are called seamless soup procedures, you know, so that you just went from one into the other. So that happens too. And then the other one, when you have multiple queens, is in situation like that, where several, you know, young queens emerge at the same time and they have to get out of Dodge real quick. They basically have to sneak out in some ways, because if the major queen, the first queen, sees them, there's not going to be good. Right. So they can, they all like sort of get out of there while she's not looking, or when maybe she's on her mating flight. Who knows how they get out? That would be a really neat, you know, study, if it's even possible to study, you know, is how those after swarms work. And if I ever get to talk to Tom Seeley again, I would love to pick his brain about how all that happens exactly, you know. So
Well,
yeah,
thank you. Is there any more questions?
I have one question. This is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I've not used a cardboard swarm box before, and so it sounds like something handy to have on hand, 1 or 2. And I use medium boxes on my hives. Are the cardboard swarm boxes, are those basically deeps that you would put medium frames into, where there's just enough room for them to all gather and collect and festoon?
So they can either hold mediums or deeps.
Okay.
And if you have mediums and it's a bigger swarm, they will festoon under the frame as well.
Okay.
So when you take the frame out, you'll have bees on the frame, and then you'll have bees underneath. And what I do, I gently, you know, sort of brush them off, you know, on the frame onto the frames that are already in the hive before I put it in, you know.
Okay.
Right, because I do all mediums as well. I mean, yeah.
Thank you. That answers my question perfectly.
Yep. Yeah, just don't leave them in the box a long time because then
then
you'll
they'll-
have comb underneath,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Thanks.
And they're light. The reason I like the cardboard boxes, they're light. You know, I have a wooden one and it's just like if you have to hold it and then you put 3, 4, 5 pounds of bees in there, your arm will get really tired. You know, or if you're up on a ladder, it's, you know, so I think there's just they're very light, really easy to work with.
Thank you for the presentation. That was beautiful,
Oh,
Christine.
yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
Right on.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I do have I want to tell people I have a Facebook page. You can follow me. It's Petaluma Bee Lady / Christine Kurtz or / Christine Kurtz. And I photograph, photograph things in the hive. I photograph my swarms. You can look at past posts of, I even have a video in there of me doing one of the bucket things and yeah, so if you want to follow me, please join me and it'll be a lot of fun. And you can always ask me questions there. I love answering questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I second that as far as your Facebook page. It's very entertaining and you always have something new, interesting. Guard bees, the last one with guard bees and everything.
Oh.
I enjoyed watching that. I recommend everybody